Good evening. Hello, welcome. Welcome to Main Street Books. This is our virtual gathering space. It's good to see you all. Thanks for being here. We're so glad to be together tonight. It is the eve of Bookstore Romance Day, which is Saturday, August 21st. That's tomorrow, and we'll be celebrating in the store. But tonight, we're kicking it off with an evening with a favorite romance writer of ours. I wrote in my newsletter this week that when I came into my role as the owner of Main Street Books, which was in 2015, I quietly self-identified as a pretty highbrow reader. So broody novels, environmental tomes, memoirs of literary figures. I mean, I had read a romance or two, but I had my thoughts and feelings, even though I knew a little bit better than to really share them widely. But then in 2019, I think it was, I read Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, and I have not looked back. I hope that you're all of that you are here are laughing at me just a little bit because you know the joy that I was withholding from myself. So anyway, I'm here for Romance Now. Tonight, I am so pleased to sit down with Lyssa Kay Adams to talk about the fourth book in her series about my favorite ensemble cast, the Bromance Book Club. So Lyssa Kay Adams, she's the author of the Bromance Book Club series, which includes Undercover Bromance, Crazy Stupid Bromance. The Bromance Book Club is the first in the series. And then, of course, Isn't It Romantic, which came out this summer, which was one of my favorite beach reads last month. In addition, she's the author of Seventh Inning Heat and Wild in Rio. She came to writing novels after nearly 20 years. As a journalist, she's an advocate for normalizing men as readers of romance, which led her to a monthly subscription box service that she offers called Men Read Romance. She lives in Michigan with her family and her pup, Domino. So for those of you listening in live tonight, a couple of housekeeping notes. Type your questions in the chat as we go along. We'll answer your questions at the end. And then you're welcome to have your video on or off. That is your preference, but please keep yourself muted. All right. So without further ado, welcome, Lyssa. It's so glad to have you. I'm so glad to have you. It's so good to see your face tonight.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you having me. And I'm so glad that you guys, are celebrating the Bookstore Romance Day this weekend. And I'm so glad you found your way to romance novels. You put it wonderfully that when people discover the genre, they realize they've been withholding joy from themselves. So
yeah,
I love that.
So yeah, in my newsletter, I was like, okay, y'all, like a lot of you don't, like, already, I'm really late to this party. I mean, I already sell something that's been on the market for like over 1,000 years, books. But I'm just going to say it again for the people in the back. Romance books bring me joy. So on that note, or maybe the flip side of that, it's been a pretty gut-wrenching week in the news.
Yes.
All sorts of things, local, state, here in North Carolina, nation, internationally. Like, how are you? How are you in your world in Michigan?
Yeah, it's been a rough week. It's been a hard couple of years. In fact, I just came back from my daughter's first volleyball scrimmage of the school year, and I was sitting there thinking, it's been a really long time since we've done this normal thing. This will be the first time since March of 2019 that my daughter's actually been in March of 2020. Couldn't remember what year it was. Since March of 2020, since she's been like doing normal school stuff, and so it did kind of put some things in perspective, how weird our world has been. But reading romance brings joy, and writing it brings joy. So it's definitely been a form of escape.
Yeah, like at first glance, it kind of feels a bit flip to be celebrating Bookstore Romance Day at the end of this like
I know.
week.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, what's your take on it? Why is it
Yeah.
not flip to be having to just to go with it?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it's interesting because some people have actually really struggled to not just write. Authors I know have really struggled to write over the course of the, past 18 months. But also to read, like that they have a hard time getting into something new, or but I get notes from people saying romance has gotten me through all of this, that it's a wonderful way to sort of escape. And I think one of the things I love most about the romance genre is that even though the books deal with hard issues often, I mean, sometimes, yeah, they're just kind of fun and fluffy, and that's fine, but often they dig into some deep issues, and yet they all focus on ultimately hope. And so you almost always leave a romance novel feeling a little more hopeful than you did before. And so I think that that's one thing that's worth celebrating, is that there is a genre that at its core is about reminding people that there is hope on the horizon. There is, that you can get through hard things. And so, yeah, but it is funny that, with everything that's going on in the world, it feels weird sometimes to be promoting a book. It feels weird to be celebrating anything. You sometimes feel guilty. Like it's I know a lot of authors feel this way, that they're like, I don't want to promote my book right now. It just seems, out of place. But I do know there are a lot of readers who appreciate having stories right now that give them a nice hopeful feeling.
Yeah, I was in that camp both in the summer of 2020. I mean, absolutely.
Mhm.
And the spring, I mean, that was all, Jane
Yeah.
Austen retellings for me, and moving
Right.
on to some more contemporary, and it really made a huge difference to be able to keep reading, which is something that I love, but like
Yeah.
I did not need another source of angst in my
No.
life. And really and sort of back to the sort of idea of romance, like I said, I've come to romance late in life, and I didn't even really fully understand that, like, what ties romance stories together is, of
Mhm.
course, we know there's a love story, and there's going to be a wide range of
Yeah.
levels of physical intimacy and that sort of thing, but that there's always a happy ending like that. Like, oh, okay, and now I can really trust, like,
Yes.
I can really trust this genre with my heart.
Yes. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I do think that's one of the reasons why people become such avid readers, is that that no matter what you put your characters through, and no matter, there are dark moments in all of the books, that readers can trust that, okay, I know this is going to work out.
Yes. Whew. Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about your books. In case that there are folks here or eventually listening to this event that are unfamiliar with the Bromance Book Club, give us your tell us the premise of this group of men, so that everyone's got a little bit of context before we start talking about, isn't it romantic?
Yeah, sure. So the first book in the series is called the Bromance Book Club, and that is what this group of men call themselves. And it's a group of men in Nashville. The series is set in Nashville, and it's really sort of high achieving men who exist in hyper masculine worlds. Professional athletes and CEOs, and so sort of what we might think of stereotypically as hyper masculine men. But they have discovered that reading romance novels sort of opens them up to a new lens to the world. It sort of opens up a new lens to the world, and that they learn lessons from these books. And so they call romance novels manuals because they see them as instruction manuals for a lot of things about how to be, open emotionally, how to be vulnerable, how to, to be better partners in their relationships and better friendships. And so it's really about the whole series. Every single book in the series is really about these guys working through some of these toxic gender stereotypes that they, that they are raised in, that boys tend to be raised in, and that tend to be reinforced by the world. And so it's funny. I mean, I try to make it as funny as possible, but also to be, talking about real issues that guys might think they don't have permission to talk about with other guys, and so it's just been great. So every book in the series focuses on a different couple, a different guy from the book club. And the fourth one just came out, and I'm working on the fifth one right now. So
Ooh, yay. Okay, so the members of the Bromance book club need to be pretty ideal for this sort of premise, because that's what gives readers, and at this point, honestly, women and femme readers are rooting for these men to be really great guys, right?
Yes.
That's what the fantasy is. And the premise really works, but we wouldn't really care about them or the rest of the cast. So, friends and girlfriends and wives and that sort of thing, if they were perfect. So
Right.
how do you do that? Where's their humanity? How does that play into us caring about them?
Yeah. So, and that's, I think that's one of the hardest jobs for a writer in any genre, is how do you craft a character that readers will want to follow through an entire journey? And how do you make them something that a character can root for, even if they're not necessarily likable at the beginning? Like, I mean, a lot of my characters have some real issues they need to work through that. But I think the key is, for me, is twofold. One is to make them real. And what I mean by that is give them flaws, give them things that, blinders. Everyone's got blinders to their own behavior sometimes. And so it can be hard to write it, because a character might be behaving in a way that people are going to be like, oh my God, that's such a jerk move. Why would you do that? But people do it in real life. And so, I try to give them issues to work through that I know people in real life have to work through. And I think the other way is to craft the novels in a way that the plot that I put them into is directly targeted to helping them through that journey. So directly targeting whatever their fears are, whatever their flaws are. The plot is crafted to help them remove those very specific blinders. And so there's a lot of self-discovery, I think, in my novels, that like all of the characters have to go through a process in which they realize about themselves, oh yeah, I've kind of got a shortcoming there. I need to work
and what
through
I love that they're leaning on other men, right, for that sort of personal growth journey, and not necessarily the women in their lives. The women don't necessarily have to, they're not responsible for.
Yeah. And in fact, there's one conversation in the books in which the guys even talk about that, we expect women in our relationships to do all of this emotional work, to be not just our partner and our lover, but our therapist, to carry this heavy emotional burden. And really, to be fair, we have to do that ourselves. We have to learn how to do that ourselves. And so they really open up to each other in a way that I hope men in real life actually will feel comfortable doing.
It is titillating.
Yes. It's a great fantasy.
But it's like not that unrealistic, I don't think. That's what I think is great. So in the fourth installment, so we've got Isn't It Romantic, number 4 in the set. You, of course, center this very unlikely member of the cast. Vlad has been, in the last 3 books, this comic relief, and now he's the protagonist. The comic relief, of course, was based on this, these intestinal issues that he has, flatulence and all sorts of things. So when I was, first realized that Vlad was going to be the protagonist here. He's a Russian hockey player in Nashville. And I was literally like, how are you going to do this? So
how do you make him a romance hero?
Exactly, right? The least romantic.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you resolve that. I was just like incredible relief. Like if you're coming to this book having read the other three, it's like, oh, what sort of Pandora's box has she opened? But
right.
to my great relief, it's resolved. That issue is resolved right there in the first paragraph.
Yeah, pretty
which
much.
I love. Yeah. But tell us, how did you connect the dots between his character from the past three books? I mean, he's clearly a great guy in the other books, but he's just, he's a little
very
two-dimensional.
two-dimensional. Yeah.
But then you open up this world. And so how did you like I said, connect those dots from past Vlad to this really full character with this incredible life?
It was hard. And I will say it's funny because when I started this series, he was never supposed to get his own book. That was never the plan. But after the second book, I started getting messages from people saying, are you going to give Vlad his own book? And I laughed it off like, no. But then my editor said, I don't know, I think you should consider it. So at the time I was working on revisions for book 3. So I started planting some seeds in book 3 about that there might be a little more to this guy than we think. And, then I end book 3 with this sort of strange interaction that he has with Liv and Mac's wedding, when a woman walks in and everyone's like, oh my God, is that the Russian's wife? So that's the jumping off point then for book 4. But the struggle was that not only did I have to try to explain, try to resolve this issue that has made him a bit of comic relief in the previous books, but I also had to come up with a plausible reason why he and his wife, who've been married for 6 years, but have never really lived together, what is the backstory there? So the hard part for me was I spent a ton of time fleshing out their backstory. Who was he before he came to the United States as a hockey player? Who was she before she came here as his wife? And I just was able to build a very full picture of who this man is, and then craft a story around that. And it was difficult. The draft that I turned into my editor, the first draft, I think probably 80% of it was rewritten by the time the final past pages landed on my desk. So it was a hard balance of keeping him this sweet, gentle giant that everyone had come to love, but also giving him, three-dimensional flaws and a life. And so it was a balancing act.
Yeah. So he's, one of the issues and with each of your books, there is for lack of a better word, this a social issue kind of at the heart. Right. So of course he's an immigrant and immigration is an issue, but tell us how you get from immigration to journalism.
Yeah. So when I was originally, I was going to focus a lot more on some of the issues of some of the unfairness about the American immigration system, and that, someone like Vlad, who was able to just cut to the front of a very long line because he could play a sport, when there are so many people waiting to come here, but don't have a special skill. But I also needed to have a reason why, even though they were able to cut to the front of the line, Vlad and Elena, why would she want to go back? And it was actually I was well into the first draft when it hit me that, okay, wait a minute. Her dad, you find out very early in the book, it's not a spoiler here, that her father disappeared in Russia as a journalist. And that's one of the reasons that, you find out was one of the reasons why she ended up marrying Vlad and coming here. And that she feels this very, just this agony that she doesn't know what happened to him. And so I realized that really the story I wanted to tell was not just about the complications of immigration, but also the guilt that someone feels, and the agony of not knowing what happened to a loved one. And so she decides to follow in his footsteps as a journalist. And at the beginning of the book, she's on her way back there. She wants to go back to Russia and basically find out what happened to her dad, use her journalism skills to do that. But also, I was a journalist for almost 20 years.
Yes.
And so, and so I always knew I wanted to write a journalist's, heroine at some point. And it just worked with Elena. She's very passionate. And so it was really fun to bring some of that to the book. It's, certainly I never uncovered a sex trafficking ring, but, but it was very fun to just sort of play around with some of the passion that a journalist feels.
Yeah, so it is. I do think it's interesting that this book about this character who was never part of the original sort of universe brings you back to your, your writing career of origin. I think that's really interesting, and I'm curious about, obviously writing as a journalist and writing as a novelist are really different, but these books require a lot of research. I mean, clearly, and I could see your sort of deep connection to journalism experientially in reading Elena's story. But how do you, just the whole idea of putting sort of heart and soul in all of these relationships that have to, these stories come from, the fictional stories do come from a lot of research, and then differentiating that process from doing, research to write for accuracy and
so it's funny because I actually have always described my plotting process and my research process as I'm reporting my book. I'm as if I were reporting a story. And so and that's how I've just always approached it as, I've got a framework. I know the key, what are the key questions at the start that I need to answer? And I just start answering them. And then those always send me down a different path. And then I got to go research that path until I feel like I've got a really, enough information to get started. But, so I research just like I did as a journalist. I mean, I do interviews with people, I set up, I reach out to experts and do phone interviews with them or Zoom interviews. And, I basically will send them follow-up emails and I've got another question. So it's quite a process. And of course I'm going to get some things wrong. I had a very angry email from someone after Crazy Stupid Bromance came out because calico cats apparently are almost always female cats. That didn't even occur to me to research.
Right.
So I knew that orange cats were almost always male, but I didn't know that about calicos. So you're always going to miss something, But so I just kind of have a starting point of questions, and like I did as a reporter.
Is like the psychology of relationships a part of that? Like,
oh gosh, yes. Oh gosh, yes. Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, I I do research on, well, for example, for Elena, I did a lot of research into what are some of the psychological effects of having a parent go missing. And so, I as they say, I fell down a rabbit hole of research into how does that manifest itself in some people? And would it be realistic for her to think, I'm going to go back and try to, to fix this or find him, or would she be too scared to do that? So I definitely dig into psychology. I dig into right down to things like, what are their love languages? What is each character's love language and how does that vibe with the other person? So I enjoy that. I enjoy the research process very much. It's very fun.
Well, writers often joke about their internet browser search history when they're in the research phase of a book, right?
Oh man, yeah.
But I am curious because of Elena's character and the arc of her story. So like in all seriousness, I don't know that I'd really given this much thought, but are there privacy concerns for journalists in the US? Like, part of what we asked people to do for this event was to consider making a donation to the Committee to Protect Journalists. What are the issues around like security and safety
for sure
US journalists?
There's always, there's one of my favorite quotes that I learned early on in my journalism career was, if you're going to do rough stories, you're going to encounter rough seas. And that's the truth. The minute you do a story that's going to anger somebody, you're kind of always wondering, what's this person going to do? Angry emails, threats, usually just of lawsuits, but threats of violence are common to reporters. I did a story, when I was working out in California, that I was getting enough sort of credible threats of violence and that someone was going to follow me, that I had to get my editor involved and be like, okay, do we need to take this seriously? Is this person really going to do anything? I will say it was never awful until really after 2016, when there was a lot of national, coming straight from the White House, a lot of very violent rhetoric being directed at the press. And I'm not trying to take this down a political route, I swear, but just the past 4 years have been some of the most dangerous for American reporters and some of the scariest. I have friends who are still reporters who got concealed carry permits for the first time because they had enough credible threats coming in. I had one friend who covered, she works in Florida. She just left the industry, but she would routinely need to have police protection going and coming from political rallies. For the first time, really, in a long time, reporters have to worry about being, what they call doxxed, and threatened online, and having their families threatened. I have one friend who had someone sent him an email that had a startling amount of detail about his child. And, of course, it scared him. So, and all because he'd written a story that this guy didn't like, Yeah. So, but it's nothing compared to what journalists face in other countries, and so that's why I suggested for donation to the Committee to Protect Journalists, that where even in countries that claim to have a free press, they don't. And Russia certainly is one of them. It's a lot of state-run media, and journalists there really very much, their lives are in danger if they report on something that the state doesn't like, and it's critical of the state. And so it's a very scary time to be a journalist in a lot of countries. But I firmly believe it's the one thing that stands between democracy and not democracy is to have, the spotlight of an independent press.
Yeah, no, even my high school public education, there were a couple of things that came out of American history, and free press is absolutely clearly one of them.
Do you guys hear I'm sorry, my dog is barking. I'm sorry. Domino! I don't know what he saw that made him bark. Domino, come here. Stop. Sorry about that. Sorry, everybody. I'll get him over here so he stop barking. Domino, come here. Oh, see, I teased him with a snack. Here we go. Now he'll stay. Sorry.
Is he there? Is he gonna make a cameo?
He actually has gone back to settle on his bed. Okay. So apparently he's fine now.
Well, to just wrap our conversation up, I wanted to ask what are you reading now?
Yeah, so I so much. First of all, I just finished a book that just came out called Heartbreak for Hire by Sonia Hartle. Is a hilarious book, so I highly recommend it. And I do have it over my shoulder. Hold on, I grab it.
All right,
so here's this one, Heartbreak for Hire. And
is there a trope at the heart of that one?
Yeah, so this is it's a funny trope. It's actually a revenge trope. It's so cleverly done. The protagonist works for a company that women can hire to sort of give the just desserts to men who deserve it, and a man that she ends up being hired to sort of get some revenge on, then ends up being hired by the company. And so so it's enemies to lovers, revenge trope, and it's so well done. There were some lines in there that I literally just laughed out loud. I mean, she's a very clever writer. Mm-hmm.
I love the combination of the rom and the com.
Yes. And then I was lucky to read an early copy of a book that comes out September 7th called Mom Jeans and Other Mistakes by Alexa Martin. And she's a great romance author. She has written an entire series. If you like sports romance, pick up Alexa Martin. This is not a sports romance. This is a different series. And it's, again, laugh out loud funny, very compelling. So I just enjoyed that. And Harper St. George is another author to put on your list. She writes a series set in late like 1890s, so sort of Gilded Age. She's got a series about a group of American heiresses who are sort of forced by their parents to go to England to find a titled husband. And they're all not having it. They're like, nope, I'm not being forced into a marriage. And they're just absolutely amazing books. So,
fantastic. I don't know Harper St. George.
Yeah, she's great, absolutely great. So those are the three that I've read recently that I just really enjoyed.
I'm glad that you can write romance and also read it, but it doesn't stop you from this source of joy.
Yes.
I'm okay. A little follow-up question.
Yeah.
About romance. It's like romances that come out that are, anyway, new romances.
Yeah.
So there's this big trend, and to be transparent, I've only actually read romances that have illustrated covers.
Yeah.
Because I got into this, recently.
Yeah.
So, what's your take on the trend or like the changes in the way that romance covers are designed?
It's really complicated because full disclosure, I'm terrible at covers. You could put anything in front of me and I'd be like, that's great, that looks wonderful. Like I'm such a bad judge of book covers. That
seems generous. I mean, that's not a bad thing.
I'm just really bad at it. So I would have no idea what's marketable. So I think it's kind of twofold. I think on the one hand, longtime romance readers kind of miss the sexier covers, and there are some people who are like, hey, if you're doing these illustrated covers because someone's ashamed to have the shirtless torso cover, that's dumb. I mean, you should be, we're all proud romance readers. I do think that marketing drives a big part of it, and that retailers are much, there are certain retailers that are not going to put a shirtless torso on their shelves.
Full disclosure, I think independent bookstores have a long history with being a little snobby about romance book covers, and romance, Bookstore Romance Day really was the genesis was to really bring together romance writers, romance readers, and bookstores to like build some bridges.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really, until I was really kind of putting my thoughts together for tonight, I hadn't thought about the fact that I hadn't actually read I know you're using the right
Non-illustrated,
words.
yeah.
Yes, a non-illustrated, which doesn't do them justice, but like the photographic,
Yeah, I'm not sure what they
embracing
call
couple type of
right.
romance.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and
well,
it's funny because I think I think a lot of it is marketing. That just is what is selling. And what I mean by selling is that's what retailers are buying. Like it's what the
yeah,
salespeople are getting a lot of response to, from
it does
their
make
various
for
retailers.
it makes for really like pretty shelves. I will say, brightly
So
colored,
pretty.
happy
Yeah.
shelves. You can
Yeah.
see if in my view over here. So this
Yeah.
is not this is YA, but like this half of it is
Yeah.
a lot of YA romance. And you can see
Yeah.
how brightly colored it is. This is like fantasy and magic, very dark.
Yes. Oh yeah. I mean, it definitely sends a message, of hope and happiness and fun. I think some people are confused because they're like, oh, I thought this was going to be like a slapstick, hilarious book because of the cover. And then they're like, wait a minute, there's like death in this book. So, and on the page sex, they're like, I did not expect that. So it's
yeah.
I do think we're going to start to see the trend change. I think we're going to get back to some different covers pretty soon because everything can be overdone and we're reaching a saturation point. So I predict that we'll move into what we used to have in the 90s, which were these like flowers. Do you remember like the covers that would have like, there wouldn't be a single person on the cover. It would be like a gazebo and like morning glories. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I can see us moving more into that, perhaps. But yeah, as long as the retailers are like, we can sell these, then the publishers are going to keep doing it. And here's Domino's making an appearance.
Domino!
Say hello, Domino.
Oh, Domino, you're precious.
He's so spoiled.
Well, let's take the questions to our guests. So Heather asks, will you ever set one of your books during the pandemic? And if so, how would it impact your characters and storyline?
Such a good question. Yes, and let me tell you, that is a conversation that every author is having with their agent and their editors right now, is when do we start setting books during the pandemic? And, are we ready for it yet? The hard thing is that, well, this isn't true. Indie authors can write and produce and publish very quickly. So like an indie author might write a book right now and it'll be out in 2 months. We, in traditional publishing, we operate a year in advance. And so if I wrote a book today and turned it in today, I have no idea what the pandemic is going to look like a year from now when this book comes out. And so because it's still an evolving situation, you don't want to put out a book that people are going to be like, oh yeah, remember how we thought everything was going to be fine by now? Oops, now we've got, so that's the hard part, is you don't want to throw readers out of the story because you've written something that didn't actually end up, coming true. So, but I think that I will probably start acknowledging that a pandemic happened with book 6, which in the series, which will come out in summer 23, right? Summer 23. Yes.
Yeah, that sounds
so
right.
Hopefully by then, we'll have a better idea of, what the world actually is going to look like. So, but that's definitely the hard part, is just, knowing what's the world going to look like. And that's why you sometimes had romance writers, and I guess other authors too, wait a while before they started acknowledging September 11th in their books, which of course we're coming up on 20 years, but of that, which I cannot believe it's been 20 years. But, it took a while because we didn't know what the world was going to look like in post September 11th. So you didn't want to write something that was actually going to end up being almost offensive, to families who lost loved ones. And
yeah. Rosie asks, could we get a little preview of book 5?
Yeah, for sure. It is about Colton, who is a country music star that he plays a very prominent role in book 4, and his. I'm not going to say who his love interest is yet, not until like the cover copy starts coming out into the fall catalogs. next fall's catalogs. But it is it's an enemies to lovers story. So Colton, yeah.
Well, I thought I knew who it was going to be because in Isn't It Romantic? I had some guesses, but that throws a wrench in my forecast.
So apparently I had a little bit too much flirting going on between Colton and Andrea in book 4. Because a lot of people are like, oh, obviously she's going to be the...
I literally said that to people after I read the book. I was like, oh, I know what the next one's going to be about. I'm clever and catching on.
I did not realize that people were going to see that. But it's Colton and somebody else. And it is someone that you have met before in the books. So yeah, it's been really fun. And it's a Christmas story, a Christmas book.
Oh. So, okay, cool.
So it's basically the Bromance Book Club meets A Christmas Carol.
Okay. About. Jan asks, what do you think about readers who, who are willing to watch rom-com movies but are reluctant to read romances?
Yeah, that it's completely about personal preference. They are two different mediums, and so I know people who are the opposite. They love reading romance and they hate rom-com movies. And I think, and I've learned a lot about this process because the Bromance Book Club is under development by Netflix right now. And so like looking at the script, I was able to read the script and just seeing how they adapt a book to the screen. It really hammers home how different these two storytelling mediums are. And so, yeah, for sure, there are going to be a lot of people who love the way a story unfolds in a movie and not so much, in the way the story unfolds in a book, and vice versa. And I think what I would just say to people is, think about what your favorite rom-com movie is and put out on social media. Does anyone have a recommendation for a book that's like this movie? And I guarantee you'll get 10 recommendations. It's just about finding the right book. Like if you love Sleepless in Seattle, which I know I'm reaching back into the far back machine with that one, but it's my favorite. What kind of book would give you that same sort of feeling?
Yeah. I think you've answered Jody's question, which was, will we see any members of the Bromance Book Club on the big screen? Yes. Rosie says, well, it's obviously Claude who is Colton's love interest.
Now that would be fun. Claude, I have to create a spin-off series for the Loners. I mean, they were so fun to write. Like, yeah. And they were actually based on a real club that my grandma was part of, by the way. My grandma was extremely irreverent. Club? Yes. My grandma was the most irreverent, hilarious person. And after, she's World War II generation, greatest generation. After my grandfather died, they'd been married 50 years. And then like a whole bunch of women in town at the same time, they just started losing their husbands right around the same time. So she started a club called the Loners Club. And it was this like irreverent lunch club of these like 80-year-old women. It was really, really
That's amazing.
Funny. Yeah, it was really funny. I'm like, oh my God, Grandma. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that's a wrap on questions from the audience.
Great.
And so I think that without further ado, we'll say a big old thank you. And we really, really, really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me so much.
Wonderful Bookstore Romance Day. Are you doing anything for Bookstore Romance Day tomorrow?
You know what? I'm just going to go and enjoy a bookstore for the first time in
Yay!
Yes. I'm going to walk around and shop the aisles. And yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Anonymous.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, have a great day. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks to everyone who joined us. Great questions.
Thank you for having me. And also, I have to give a shout out to my friend Jody. Hi, Jody. I do see you here. So
yes. Hi, Jody. Thanks to Jody for connecting. Jody's local to us. Thanks to Jody for connecting Main Street Books with Lyssa Kay Adams. Big shout out.
It's a great time. Thanks so much for having me. And Domino says, Thank you.
Good night,
He got a lot-
Domino.
He got a lot of snacks to stay quiet. So
Thanks so much.
thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.